Codility brings you and your candidates the best hiring experience to separate the great from the good, and will help you adapt to the challenges of hiring remotely. This brings faster hiring, reduces bias, and gives your engineers more time to solve problems that matter. That's why we're already working with some of the best engineering teams in the world. Schedule a demo with us to learn how we can help you shape the future of work today. Codility. Remote tech hiring everywhere.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Lofton. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Success here at Codility. Now, Codility is the leading technical assessment platform for over 1,000 customers globally. And we have a really exciting webinar today focused on the future of work and beyond. I'm joined by an all-star panel of leaders in the hiring industry who we'll introduce to you shortly. But just a few housekeeping items before we begin. So we really want to make this an engaging webinar for folks. So we encourage you to participate by asking questions. And so we'll have a combination of some preset questions that we'll walk through and also some questions from the audience to make it really engaging. I know we have about 45 minutes here. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panel. And so welcome to our panel today. Very excited to have each and every one of you and looking forward to this discussion. Let's go ahead and start by introducing yourself and giving us a little bit of background around your role in the hiring process and a little bit about your company. We'll go ahead and start with Nadia.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you for having me, especially with Scott and Annie as well. I am VP of People at Remotecom. We are an EOR and so much more. We're also a global company and distributed, and went through an amazing hyper-growing year this year. I joined a year ago. We were 70 people. We're now just over 600 employees globally in more than 50 countries in the world. And that's exactly what we're trying to solve, right? Is to allow organizations to hire anywhere in the world, but also allowing talent to gain access to those amazing opportunities with Silicon Valley startups or UK-based startups, etc. So yeah, really, really happy to be here. Wonderful,
thank you. Annie, how about yourself?
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. So I'm Annie Jackson, and I head up non-tech recruitment at Cleo. For those who haven't heard about Cleo, we are a fintech startup with a mission to help fight for the world's financial health. We've built an AI-powered money coach who talks to our users almost as if she were a friend. She helps them to break down their spending habits and hit their financial goals. Our team are around 150 headcount across the UK, the EU, and the US. And our UK team have a hybrid setup with an office in London for those who wish to use it. And then the European and US teams are fully remote. I joined Cleo about a year and a half ago now, and we've grown from 50 to 150. So yeah, looking forward to sharing some insights on our team's experience hiring remotely. Yeah, that's all from me.
Great. Welcome again, and thanks to have you, Annie. All right, last but not least, Scott.
Last but not least, excellent. So I'm Scott Jennings. I am the Director of Industry Strategy at Checkr. Checkr is a background check company that is the founder of API-led background checks. We're embedded in most of the gig economy, probably close to 100% of gig economy platforms, 1099 contractor platforms, and quite a few different W-2 hiring platforms as well. My role at the organization that I'm lucky enough to have is to work with our customers, our partners, analysts, really anyone who wants to understand how and why would an organization invest in Checkr to produce the business outcomes of faster, better, more compliant hiring.
Fantastic. Thank you, Scott. And thank you to each one of you. Excited to learn a little bit about your perspective. So I want to start off with just kind of a general question. So in order to kind of look towards the future, it's always dictated by the past, right? And so looking into 2022 and beyond, we have to look back at the last couple of years and kind of that roller coaster that we've been through. And it's interesting. I know that we were talking before we jumped on, specifically with Nadia. A lot of the things that we look at feel kind of the same, but I know a lot of things are so dramatically different. So what I'd love to do is understand from maybe each one of you, looking back, and specifically about your organization's perspective. I know a lot of organizations, some of them were really ahead of the curve when it came to things like remote work and virtual offices and things of that nature. And there's a lot of organizations that really had to adapt on the fly. And also within the candidate experience. So I'd love to understand your perspectives, maybe looking back a little bit, and some of the things that maybe you guys were really prepared for, and some of the things that you kind of took away from that experience that you're going to carry into 2022 and beyond. So I'd like to maybe start with Annie on this one.
Yeah, I guess like a really obvious one is the shift to remote interviewing. I think that's been a huge shift for us. I think obviously we did a lot more in-person interviews for nearly every single role previously, and had to switch to fully online very, very quickly. I think that's definitely helped things in terms of it being a lot more convenient for candidates, and like accessing a wider pool of talent, and also enables us to interview out of hours as well, which is quite handy for people that are really busy. And I think it's something that we'll probably continue doing, even in the next few years and beyond as well, definitely.
Yeah, that's very good points. Nadia, I'd love to bring you into this conversation as well too.
Yeah, I recognize I have a bit of privilege here. I've been in remote first companies for more than 5 years, going on my sort of end of 6th year now. And so I think in remote.com as well, we were remote first from the start. We don't have a single office in the world. And so we were really set up for success. Again, that privilege and having so much gratitude for that. And I think the key thing for us is if you already have remote first practices, you didn't go through that weird and awful remote forced approach, right? And I think that's what a lot of companies did. And looking back, if I look at the amount of calls and outreach I received, not just from customers, but even folks just in the people and HR space needing help to set that up, we're very fortunate that our amazing executive team, my peers, and our board allows us to be incredibly transparent and public about how we do these things and how we've gone about setting it up. And so a lot of companies could pull inspiration from that. I saw a really slow uptake on the flexibility, like the key amazing benefits, right, of remote first environments. And I think just due to that, we saw a huge increase in talent being attracted to remote. This year alone, if I look at like the statistics and metrics, in the beginning of the year, I was still tracking how many applications we were receiving. And I think on average, we would get about sort of 3,000 applications every 2 weeks. At the moment, we're getting around 36,000, especially now more recently, in a 2 to 3 week period. And that's a clear indication that, talent and amazing folks out there around the world is very interested in remote first environments, that's doing this really well, that understands the benefits of it. And then like the key thing for us was we already work asynchronously. We already had the documentation set up. So again, I recognize what a benefit that was. And I think my advice is if any organization hasn't done that yet, I would certainly start there. Like start thinking about people first, documentation first, and then remote first practices. Because that's just going to help I nearly want to say present of work because we're in it, right? The future is here. And so I nearly want to say like renaming that a bit to the present of work is here. And so it's time to adapt and sort of move forward with that thinking, whether you're hybrid or not.
I love that. I love it. And I think adapt is just a really key word. And I think kind of for all of us, right? And so those are really, really great. Really great points, Nadia. Scott, I'd love to bring you in here. Now, I know Checkr is focused more on the pre-hire side. But I'd love to learn from you in terms of conceptually how Checkr has approached things in the past. What were some big shifts for you, and what are some takeaways that you guys are going to lean into the next year?
Yeah, great question, Scott. I'll approach the question from internal and external. So from an internal perspective, Checkr was your classic San Francisco Bay Area tech company where almost everyone lived in San Francisco. I live in Tampa Bay, so that's all the way across the country in the States, and that was one of the first hires outside of San Francisco. And when the pandemic hit, because we were examining every piece of HR and how to make it more flexible, more digital, more agile, our HR team did a really good job of leaning into the more remote and distributed workforce. And so there were a lot more folks that were outside of San Francisco, and they put in all the processes to support people to not only lived elsewhere, but perhaps moved from San Francisco to another office. They really just did a stellar job of it. So kudos to them. Just fantastic job internally. the benefit of that also was we're a scaling tech company. So you're obviously hiring at that point. So the more flexible you can be on work location, obviously you can, it eases some of the hiring burdens as well. So that's kind of the internal piece. Externally, we do a lot of work across really three types of worker classifications that are very generic: the W-2 or full-time worker, the 1099 contractor, and the gig worker. Some of those bleed over into each other. Worker classifications get a little murky, but the thing that I see coming forward in 2022, and what we hear from a lot of customers, is the bridging of the gap between the contingent workforce and the traditional HR hiring motion. So if you think about it from an executive point of view, you'd have Annie and Nadia on the HR side of the house. There's typically someone in procurement that is handling that contingent workforce spend. And in 2022 and beyond, we see those merging together where HR and procurement are getting together and kind of taking their own best practices around how you manage people from HR and then how you manage that spend from a procurement perspective to create this almost omni-channel workforce that I think is really going to benefit organizations, in particular as more workers choose to go flexible.
Yeah, no, I think it's very key and very timely. I'd like to kind of stick around that topic a little bit to maybe dive in a little bit more there. So kind of continuing with flexible workforce, and I'd love to bring others into the conversation as well. I'd like to kind of look at the candidate experience and how you guys have approached that. So in terms of flexible workforces and keeping the candidate in mind in terms of presenting a virtual workforce in a virtual environment, and what has how has that worked out for you guys? Like, what are some of the things that your candidates are telling to you throughout the process, or what's some of the feedback you're hearing, and how does that kind of play a role into some of the things that we might be looking ahead to into the next year as well? So I'll start with Nadia on this one.
Yeah. I think a key thing, again, like we extremely public about what we do. And so we were able to just keep iterating in a beautiful way on our FAQ page. And so candidates can sort of gain knowledge about what it's like to work here. What are the benefits? Like, what are the modern benefits above supplemental? What are the global reasons why I should even join this company? And so having a public page about belonging, diversity, equity, and inclusion, having a public page just for hiring, right? And that candidate experience was nearly like documented for them. So I think the number one thing for me is we were extremely transparent, and so we could just keep iterating and be more transparent. And so candidates had a good understanding of what to expect. Then when I joined, we didn't have a candidate experience survey yet. We were on a different tier in our application tracking system. I immediately started looking at optimizing that and started thinking around what optimization can I do behind the scenes to start improving the candidate experience? What can I automate? What mundane work can I remove? I absolutely love talking a bit about integration as well. And so we started looking at an integration between our ATS and our single sign-on platform. And that leads then to your HRIS. We use our own platform, Remote.com, for that. And so just by building those foundations, my candidate experience improved because my recruiters had more time to engage and less time to kind of like sit behind a desk and do data capturing or admin or trying to get someone hired. And so those small sort of crucial strategic moves very early on this year definitely helped with the amount of scaling we did. Hiring, from 70 to 600 people in 1 year during a pandemic and adding new countries as we go is certainly challenging, but I think those foundations help. And then on the candidate experience side, we implemented a survey really early on, and the moment we saw a trend in feedback, we got such valuable feedback, by the way, just by, launching that quite quickly. We started pivoting and started iterating on our hiring process based on that feedback. I love that our recruiters are so open to like hearing that feedback, even when it's hard, and being transparent about it. Our candidate experience our candidate engagement and surveys, actually, the results are publicly available. So when you're that transparent, even when it's difficult, people really pay attention because they're starting to see that even when you don't get great feedback, you're working on it, you're pivoting, you're iterating on it. And we also notice that in some categories, people don't want a long call. They want a shorter call, right? They already have Zoom fatigue. They already have kids or family or potential SO at home. And so we started looking at our screening calls and making sure that they were sort of valuable and impactful and efficient from a timing perspective as well. We also had great discussions about our recruiters and their wellness, and not just sitting in 15 calls a day. So making those small changes and doing sort of better quality work up front, I think was really helpful.
I think those are all fantastic points. So two of the themes that I see is, transparency and then also empathy, right? So I love the fact that you're recognizing that and also promoting that within your internal culture, but also externally in how you think through that candidate experience in times like these. So really great stuff. Scott, I'd love to bring you into this because I know you've got that unique perspective around the flexible workforce and some of the PreHire perspectives there at Checkr. How do you guys kind of approach the candidate experience, and what are some themes and things that you'll be doubling down on in the new year, you think?
Well, so just to dovetail on what you just said around transparency and empathy, I know you're asking the questions, but I'm going to reframe because I think those are such fantastic topics to talk about. The background check, what Checkr specializes in, we disrupted a market that is very legacy and very opaque, very frustrating to candidates. Most people don't even know what goes on when a background check takes place. So it's very, very intimidating, and you don't know when it's going to come back. And that is exactly the spot that Checkr came into the market in 2014 when the company was founded. We've done things like embedded artificial intelligence, machine learning style forecasts into the product that will let you know 9 out of 10 times down to the day when that background check will be back. Now, that might be today, that might be in 3 or 4 days, but the idea that you're going to have confidence that it's going to come back on a certain day provides that transparency that literally never existed in this industry, which is about 45 years old. We found over and over again that that's one of the most frustrating components for all things candidate. The other piece is that if you have a background and something gets flagged on your background, that can also be very, very intimidating. In particular, if there are some circumstances that people should really know about before they go judging you on it. We built the capability into our product for the candidate to tell their story. So if something comes back, they can say, this is what happened, and this is why it's happened. So I know somebody that runs a commercial landscaping business here in Florida, and a lot of his workers would get flagged for not paying child support. And when he asked them, why didn't you pay child support? The answer was, well, because we didn't have a job. So it's this circular type of lock-in that you can't get around. There's no reason that should be used against somebody in order to have a job. Because at Checkr, what we found is that 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record. So when you start looking for any type of worker shortages in the United States, there is an entire pool of fair chance hiring population that could probably solve the entire worker shortage.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I started thinking of other themes, and I feel like this also buckets into like anti-bias, and there's other things that kind of dovetail based off of that. But yeah, really fascinating stuff, Scott. Annie, I'd love to circle to you and talk a little bit about Cleo's approach to the candidate experience and takeaways and things that you might be utilizing into the future.
Yeah, of course. I think for us, as I mentioned earlier, kind of shifting to doing a lot of our interviews over Zoom and sort of remotely, I think it's meant that we can move a lot quicker than some of the bigger orgs that we're competing against for talent. So kind of wrapping up processes as soon as possible, really looking at time to hire and trying to keep that down, or sort of time to offer, and keeping that down and moving as quickly as you can. Another thing that we do that's quite nice and gets good feedback is at the end of each interview process for any permanent positions, we try and do a meet the team stage, which is just a half an hour, really informal chat with 2 people that you'd be working with in the role, just for them to really learn about the culture, ways of working, and to ask any questions that they haven't had the chance to previously. I guess when you're kind of interviewing in an office, you get a real sense for the team culture and the vibe of the company, but that can be really hard to come across online. So I think that session's kind of a good substitute. And another thing that we try and do when we're making an offer is sometimes send out like personalized gifts to people to thank them for the time, even if they do end up declining the offer. I think it's just a nice touch, and also sending like a nice welcome email from the interview panel, and also the even thinking about things like sending a welcome video to people as well, again just to personalize the experience as well.
I love it. Personalization, transparency, empathy, all of it. It's really good stuff. We're getting some questions here from the audience, and so I want to take a moment to maybe acknowledge 1 or 2 of these before we kind of get back into some of the regular program. So kind of candidate experience, we touched a little bit on culture there. One of the questions here says, how do you preserve the company culture when you're growing so rapidly? And so I'd love to maybe I'll turn to Nadia on this one, and then we can move through the group.
Yeah, so I think the number one thing for me about culture is if you have global teams, don't forget that those are global cultures, right? And so like the number one thing for me that we started thinking about was we created a values environment where those are our boundaries. So we use those values to create an environment instead of leaning into the word culture. We also really removed the word culture fit from our language long ago. I still see organizations interviewing for it. In my world, you need to interview for culture ad and skills ad and competency ads instead of culture fit. I think the sort of culture fit mentality was created in the 80s or 90s by sales folks. And if you didn't play golf, you weren't included. And so I'm very happy to see how the world's moving away from that. But in this sort of global diverse culture environment where you're going to be rapidly scaling or globally scaling, whether that's rapidly or not, you need to start thinking about what can people relate to? What can they feel that they belong to? And at Remote, I'm very proud that someone can show up as their full selves. So we really started working very hard towards belonging specifically, but then also diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that goes as far as time zone inclusion. So there's a lot of intentions. You need to be very intentional and deliberate about what you're building. With time zone inclusion, I'll just quickly touch on this. Like we go as far as thinking about if I currently have a team in more than 13 different time zones. So I need to think about how do I get my folks to collaborate across all these time zones and get together. So our weekly people call, which is only 50 minutes long and once a week, and we have many people in that call, but we've started rotating it to be Asia Pacific and EMEA friendly, and then next week EMEA and Americas friendly. And that does mean everyone's included. There's always an agenda in advance. That creates a lot of opportunity for folks to contribute, create like a 2-minute Loom, even though they can't be there and share an update or share something they're excited about. But 90% of our problems are solved asynchronously versus synchronously. And that also builds on your environment and the space that you're creating. So I can talk about culture for hours, but I'll stop there for a minute and give Annie and Scott a chance if they want to jump in.
It's great stuff. And I just want to comment really quick. I think I love that. I love how you talked about trying to bring everyone together through those different time zones. So I know it's challenging, I think, for most organizations, right? So I know Codility we're a global organization, and you want to be mindful and self-aware of other folks' time too. And so I love that you guys are considering that. I think that's really a great point. Scott or Annie, I'll serve it up to either one of you. Any additional thoughts around company culture? Anything innovative or anything that you'd like to share with our group?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I guess it is really hard, particularly, at the size that we're at. I think I joined Cleo when there were about 50 people. We're now 150. The culture has changed. It's going to change with every hire that you make. So I think trying to keep the culture and maintain it as it exactly was a year ago is just impossible. But I think one thing that we do quite well at Cleo is we've got really clear company values, and we use them quite regularly across performance reviews, in hiring. We have like a Cleo award ceremony for each value every quarter. So kind of reminding people of the types of behaviors we're encouraging and the types of behaviors that we're not. That's kind of helped to kind of make sure that we're hiring the right people for Cleo fundamentally.
Great. Scott, I want to give you an opportunity. Anything that you'd like to add here? Or?
I would just add that at Checkr, we really lean into the company mission, and that's building a fairer future through a better understanding of the past. And it's a beautiful mission for two reasons. One is it supports the candidate in society. We're not trying to keep people out of jobs. We're trying to screen them into jobs that are relevant based on their profile. And with that, there are more candidates that are hired. You're not going to see background screens used against people in ways that perhaps they were in the past. That opens up candidate pools for businesses. So it's a win for the candidate and it's a win for the business. And to me, that rallying cry, it really gets fed through the entire organization and then also embedded in the product, because in the product, you can adjust your settings from a fair chance hiring perspective in order to effectively screen out crimes that don't necessarily matter for the jobs you're hiring for.
All great points. I'd like to add one more question here from the audience, and then we'll kind of go back to some of our other questions. So the question from the audience: do you think induction, team integration, knowledge sharing, and flows between departments suffer in the context of fully remote work, or can technology really replace people working together physically? Very interesting question. I know we were talking beforehand and hoping that, as much as we enjoy kind of being remote and some of the virtual stuff, that nothing really replaces the collaboration of being in person. I know I was traveling recently and was able to meet a lot of coworkers and teammates for the first time, and nothing really truly replaces that. So I'm curious how other folks feel about that. And I'll read the question one more time. Do you think induction, team integration, knowledge sharing, and flows between departments suffer in the context of fully remote work, or can technology really replace people working together physically? Let's start with Annie on this one.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think if you have the right tools in place, I think it shouldn't suffer with being fully remote. I guess I joined Cleo. It was my first ever remote role. I'd never worked remotely before, and I was quite nervous about making friends on the team and sort of working with people in a remote setting. But there's nothing really that's been impacted for me. I've got really great friends at work, some that I've never met in person before. I think onboarding, if you've got a really clear onboarding and induction program with lots of different members from people across all different departments, it can be really beneficial. So from my perspective, I think, I think technology can replace people working together in person for sure.
That's great perspective. How about you, Scott? Would love to turn to you on this one. What are your thoughts around it?
Well, I mean, I think the genie's out of the bottle from the perspective of remote work. It's distributed. So I don't think anything's ever going to truly replace face-to-face. But the reality is that what's going on in the world today is not going to change post-COVID. There's going to be a more distributed workforce. People are going to live all over the place. The hubs for getting things done are getting more dispersed. I think you can use technology to bridge those gaps. And I think you can use technology to make it better. I don't know that it fully replaces it, but certainly by the end of all of this, I think we're going to have technology that can get pretty close.
Yeah, I'll jump in here for a minute, Scott. I think you're spot on. Remote.com has built a product, right, to onboard folks globally. Now, can you imagine if you urgently need to hire someone in Austria because it's just the absolute most amazing Alexa or Ruby or whatever developer in the world or engineer in the world, and you just don't know how to do that. And so I think considering we're building a platform and a space to take all that pain, all that compliance, all that HR work and heavy lifting away, I'm starting to see more and more organizations really leaning into product tech companies and technology to build distributed teams. As someone, again, I'm super biased, as someone that's built onboarding programs for more than nearly 6 years, I am so excited about what we've been able to create and build on during that time. I've only been at remote for a year, but prior to that, in remote first companies, that was always my responsibility. Something I've discovered with an onboarding program is you can create so much in a very short space of time. And I think a lot of companies try to strive for some sort of weird level of perfection instead of getting a really good, simple, amazing process and amazing experience and people first experience out there first, and then start iterating and evolving that. I think, gone are the days where you can start planning a year or two in advance. I think short-term planning is going to be something in 2022 that companies need to start leaning into and start sort of using the art of iteration, which a lot of engineers have been using for years and product teams have been using for years, have been so successful in product tech companies that you can actually use this in a people-first approach as well. I think onboarding also starts when you press that hired button. There's no start and stop. I've often seen organizations, create this weird start-stop experience where someone gets an offer and then this pause that happens instead of, the person immediately getting that beautiful welcome email, telling them what's going to happen next, set expectations, inviting them to that platform to sign up. And we've built that and we've created that. And it's certainly taken so much mundane administrative HR time away. My team doesn't do data capturing, everything is more fluid and smooth, and then we lean on the person to add their data accurately, and there's an opportunity to verify that potentially through something amazing like Checkr. And so I think the world of product and tech is tremendous, and that means you have more time to engage if you're not stuck behind a very mundane, awful, old HR process. And I think, people used to receive like a pack of documents on day one. I would really cringe if that had to happen to me right now, and I would struggle to sit with a pen and fill it out. I'd much rather doodle or do some art. And so I think gone are those days. So even if you're in office or in person, start thinking about technology to do it, and then create the same experience for everyone versus for that in-office team A, team B scenario if you have folks remotely.
I was thinking through that, and it brought up a little bit of a traumatic experience. I remember one of my first jobs, there was a stack of HR paperwork you had to fill out on that first day. And so I'm sitting there, I'm starting to sweat a little bit. And I think from all of you, I think, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So I think the way that we work today, and we've really adapted really well in using some tools out there, I think there's going to be a lot more tools out there and innovation coming in the next 6 to 9 months, right? Because kind of to your point, Scott, we're already here. This is what work looks like now. Embrace it, right? And I think that's just gonna, create an environment, and already has created an environment, but kind of sustain that environment around more innovation and tool sets for us to use and create more efficiencies around that, kind of to your point, Nadia, right? So really great stuff. So we're just quick time check. We're at about, we've got about 12 minutes or so here. Gosh, we're getting a lot more questions from the audience, so I'll make sure we leave some time for that. Everyone's really engaged. Love it. I do want to shift a little bit and talk a little bit about maybe existing employees and upskilling and reskilling, right? So I think that we've talked a lot about the new candidates and some of the pre-hire concepts and culture and onboarding a little bit. I'd like to understand from each of you, because upskilling and reskilling, that's got to be hard to do a little bit. I know there's a lot of resources out there and technologies out there, but kind of curious what you guys are doing, from an employer standpoint to combat skill shortages and reduce the risk of turnover. And then also kind of identifying those gaps in that process for employee training. Scott, I'm going to turn to you on this one in terms of the pre-hire process and the flexible work environment. What are some of the things that you guys are doing at Checkr?
Well, I can talk a little bit around a couple different topics on this front. There's the pre-hire piece, and then on the post-hire side. On the pre-hire side, what we're working with a lot of organizations on is how do you want to set up your adjudication criteria, giving them the flexibility to embed the adjudication criteria that's going to work and keep their business safe, but also let them hire efficiently. We see it quite a bit in the third-party contractor world where, let's say I'm a last mile delivery provider and I'm delivering heavy goods, think like large exercise equipment or furniture. Usually there's somebody driving a truck and there's somebody in the truck to help them bring that furniture into a customer's home. In that scenario, they are contracting with, let's say, a large retail brand, and they usually have several different retailers that are customers of theirs. Each one of those could potentially have their own background check adjudication criteria that could be very heavy, maybe designed 30, 40, 50 years ago. And what that does is it prevents them from being able to hire because that adjudication criteria is just so heavy. And what they told me over and over again, these last mile delivery providers, is when their customer says that to them and they can't hire correctly or they can't hire efficiently, that very same worker goes down the street and goes and works for one of the other last mile delivery providers, where their customers might have a little bit less from an adjudication perspective in terms of a heavy background screening program. So that's on the front of the house, is just being able to relax that adjudication criteria. It doesn't need to be as heavy based on the position. Once organizations hire and you have employees in-house, I was at the North American HR Executive Summit this week in Orlando, and one of the topics was exactly this. And quite a few of the folks talked about things like talent intelligence. So really using data to make recommendations on what are my current employees' skills and attributes, and what might those apply to open positions that we have today. So rather than going out and hiring, really understanding what your workforce is today. So take the example I heard at the conference was we have an IT manager, and she has a certain set of skills around managing IT in the organization. Well, many of those exact same attributes are also found in product managers. And they may not necessarily be thinking about that. But if there's technology that can sift through those attributes and then make recommendations, it's a really easy and fun and rewarding way of offering up a new career path potentially to your own internal employees.
I love that. I love all those ideas. Nadia, I want to bring you in on this as well. What are some of the things that you're doing to upskill and reskill and within the existing employee base today?
Yeah, Scott, it's so nice to hear the level of empathy Checkr's going on to do that, like opening opportunities versus blocking it, right? I'm very familiar with your industry. I was a biometric officer at some point, so love the conversation. On the learning and development and skills side, a big thing is right now, if you think about your global workforce and the different folks working for you, a single mom is not going to be able to sit in another Zoom call for training, right? For another 90 minutes or something, or 3 hours, depending on what your organization is like. In this very modern product tech type space that we are creating, bite-sized learning is definitely the future of learning and development. I even see some schools starting to experiment with it. And so I think we are building a space where bite-sized learning is becoming very real. But at the same time, if none of that's available on a mobile application, that single mom might have like 30 minutes to go to gym and actually have some time alone, or, you know, whatever life stage someone is in, and then watch that training at the same time. Like, even if you think about the gig economists and the nomads, they definitely do not want to sit in a really long session of any sort. Our meetings at Remote is very short, 25 minutes, and there's always that 5-minute buffer to get some water, get up, stretch, close a door, open a window, whatever the case might be, right? But at the same time, I think from a skills perspective, you need to start really leaning into a people-focused and people-first approach. And that human empathy-centric thing really, really matters. It's top of mind for me. And then slightly further on this topic, we're really hiring for competencies. I think a lot of people managers are not very used to that in the world yet, and are still like, have this like list of requirements. Those biases needs to be sort of uncovered and removed. We did unconscious bias and explicit bias and interview training quite early on for a startup, but we also recognize that's not the only time you can do that. That's got to evolve and continue. It's got to be an ongoing, evolving topic. It's not a once-off quick thing. And so I think, you know, as the world keeps turning and as we move into this present future of work, I think that level of awareness around competencies and like, what are those skills that I need for future? What are those talent, intelligence, the word Scott used, beautiful word or beautiful statement, that you need in future is very, very valid. And I think where I'll end with this is something I'm passionate about is we plan to do something like a launch pad next year. We haven't started planning, but we do have an idea. We've got a rough sort of version of what we want to do. So aligned to an internship program, we actually want to help folks just launch their careers. No experience, no qualifications, right? They just really need a logo on their CV. It's going to be very difficult to pull that off, but I'd love to be that level of organization that says this person needs an opportunity. They actually just need a chance to showcase what they can do. And if they have certain competencies, regardless of their background, we can probably help them for 6 or so months to get paid, deliver that, and have them on our CV, and ultimately strive for an organization where great talent comes from. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love both of those, how those kind of, Scott, your kind of feedback on what you guys do, and Nadia, that seems to be interwoven. Annie, I'd love to give you an opportunity to chime in here. I'm sure you have some thoughts around what you guys are doing at Cleo.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think what Nadia was saying around younger talent and bringing them in, I think during the pandemic, we really saw there were a lot less junior roles open. And I think I did feel for anyone that had just recently graduated from school or that was new into the workforce. I think it was a really tough time. So I think one thing that we did try was a kind of work experience program that we're hoping to roll out again for the people maybe that are quite young with no or like very limited experience, just to kind of help people get their foot in the door, just to get some exposure to the tech environment as well. But yeah.
Great. Just a quick time check. This has gone really fast. And I'm sure we all could probably stay on another hour and talk about this, but we've only got 5 minutes. So I'd love for each of you, as we're just about 3 weeks left in the year, and I'm already thinking about New Year's resolutions and things like that. So I'd love for each one of you to maybe comment to our audience about one wish you have around 2022 in terms of the organization and how you approach things, or something that you're really even excited about in terms of the future of work. So I'll go ahead and I'll start with Annie on this one.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think for me, just trying to do things a bit differently. I think we've played it safe a bit this year with the way that we kind of work in terms of hiring, and I'd love to just try some new things around candidate experience and just going over and above on that kind of banding and sort of, just trying new things. I think, that's kind of front of mind for me, just being a bit more innovative and changing the status quo. I think one thing we did really well this year, we launched all of our salary bandings externally, and that's had a really positive effect. It's been really well received externally. Just doing more of that, more disruptive stuff, more innovative stuff in the HR space.
That's great. Scott, how about you?
So I'll talk external to the company. One of the things, if you follow kind of the contingent labor workforce, over time, the concept of digital staffing is really becoming popular with talent marketplaces. And I think in 2022, that's just going to absolutely explode, because that entire industry, you think about the high touch recruiter perspective, moving over to we have a technology widget that onboards, let's say, talent that we need in a shift today, maybe even for a particular day part. A lot of that is taking place, and that ability to effectively assemble that digital technology stack to do that, I think you're going to see more and more of that. And it's not just going to be in a staffing space. It's going to bleed over into all of HR tech, kind of bleeding into that concept I talked about at the very, very beginning, which is there's a convergence between what HR is doing and procurement is doing, from a traditional full-time W-2 employee all the way to that contingent workforce. I see those kind of coming together.
All right. And Nadia, last but not least here, as with just a couple minutes remaining, would like to understand your hope, your some of the predictions you might have for the new year.
Yeah, I'll try and add some tactical sort of tips maybe to help. But I think my number one ask is probably to stop this time tracking, remote forced approach now. If you're still doing it, that's my number one wish for organizations. And I think if you're going hybrid, it's time to realize that you're going to need to start thinking about how you're going to treat everyone the same. It's hard, and so lean into simplicity and start thinking about making things asynchronously available, following remote first over remote forced practices. And by that, I mean documentation first, having things readily available, no meetings without an agenda, everyone showing up with their own screen and not boardroom and half the crowd in their own homes. But then if I pivot a little bit to the employee side and the people experience side, I think simplicity is key. I'm seeing a lot of overthinking, sort of over worrying nearly about everything. And I think start very simple solutions for really big problems. I love the rule around, if you only have 5 minutes, you can probably solve it in 5 minutes. And so I think a lot of teams need to lean a bit in simplicity. And then pivoting to onboarding, if you think about that employee experience, that first sort of opportunity to meet folks, we really focus on self-enablement, right, when someone joins. And you don't want folks to memorize things in their first 2 weeks at your organization. You want them to be self-enabled and learn to discover. But if you're not providing the tools or the documentation or the information for them to discover anything, that's potentially what's missing. And so that's crucial for me into 2022. But simplicity is definitely key in the modern HR space.
I love it. And just to wrap things up, so I just want to thank each one of you. This has been one of my favorite webinars. You guys have been fantastic to talk to, and such great innovative ideas and engaging. So again, thank you to each and every one of you. I wish you a fantastic rest of the year and a very successful 2022, and a happy holidays to each and every one of you. To our audience, thank you for your participation, and we will see you all soon. Take care.